3 places, 3 nights, and the same terrifying feeling that someone was watching. There's a certain kind of fear that doesn't begin with screams. It doesn't start with a shadow in the hallway or blood on the floor or a face at the window. It starts much quieter than that. A glance that lasts too long. A door you know you locked, standing slightly open. Footsteps where there should be none. A stranger who seems to know more about you than they should. The worst kind of horror doesn't rush at you all at once. It eases in slowly, softly, patiently. It lets you explain it away. It waits while you convince yourself you're being paranoid. It hides inside ordinary things. A rental house, a host's smile, a quiet little cabin in the woods, until the moment comes when you realize the truth. And by then, it's already too late. Over the years, I stayed in a few temporary rental places. Some were cheap, some were convenient, some just happened to be available when I needed them most. But out of all of them, there were 3 that I still think about to this day. Not because they were haunted, but because what happened in them was worse. Because in every one of those places, I got the same sinking feeling that I was not alone, and that someone had already decided they wanted access to me. At the time, I was in between apartments. I'd already moved out of my old place, and I hadn't found a new one yet. Most of my belongings were sitting in a storage unit while I scrambled to figure out where I was going next. I needed somewhere temporary, somewhere I could stay for a few weeks while I worked and searched for a new apartment. So I booked an Airbnb in a small neighborhood about 30 minutes away from where I used to live. The area wasn't exactly dangerous looking, but it wasn't comforting either. It was one of those tired little towns that looked permanently washed out. The streets felt too quiet. The houses were old, uneven, weather-beaten. There were patches of overgrown lawns, peeling paint, and that strange kind of silence some neighborhoods have. The kind where it feels like people are always inside, watching through their curtains, but never actually outside. The house itself wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. It was livable, clean enough, forgettable. At least, that's what I thought. One of the first few nights I was there, I happened to walk past the front window and looked outside. There were 2 men standing on the sidewalk, not directly on the property, not doing anything illegal, just standing there. But they were very clearly looking at the house, looking up at it, looking long enough that when one of them noticed me in the window, both of them reacted immediately. They looked away, then they left, fast. That was the part that made it feel wrong. If they were just talking or waiting for someone or passing by, they wouldn't have reacted like that. The moment they realized they'd been seen, they moved like they had no reason to be there in the first place. I stood there for a second, staring through the glass, trying to decide whether it meant anything. Then I closed the blinds and told myself it didn't. That was the first mistake. The next afternoon, I went outside to grab a few things from my car. It was broad daylight, quiet, normal. Then I saw him. A man was standing one house down near the curb. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't getting mail or working on anything. He was just standing there. And when our eyes met, he stared at me in a way that instantly made my stomach tighten. It wasn't a casual glance. It was the look of someone who recognized me, someone who had already noticed me before. For a second, I wondered if he might have been one of the men from the night before, but I had no way of knowing. It had been too dark to make out their faces clearly. Still, Something about the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. I looked away and went back inside. And once again, I did what people always do when fear first arrives in a form small enough to ignore. I explained it away. Maybe he was just weird. Maybe I was stressed. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I was letting a new environment get to me. That day, I spent hours upstairs in the bedroom working on my laptop. Then I spent a few more scrolling through apartment listings, trying to figure out my next move. By the evening, I was mentally drained. Around 8, I went downstairs to make something quick to eat. Around 9, just before bed, I tied up the trash bag and took it outside to the bins on the side of the house. That was when I noticed the stone path leading into the backyard. I'd been so distracted the first few days that I hadn't even looked back there. So I followed it. The backyard was enclosed by an old wooden fence that looked like it had been there longer than the house itself. From inside, the yard had seemed small and plain, just grass and a fire pit. But off to one side, beyond the angle I'd never seen from the window, there was a shed, a large one. It was made of the same weathered wood as the fence, and at first it blended into the darkness so well, I almost missed it. Then I saw the light. A dim glow leaked through the narrow gaps in the wood. I stopped walking. For a moment, I just stood there, staring. I hadn't been told anything about a shed. I had no reason to think anyone should be in there. Yet the light was on, and in the silence of that yard, the glow felt wrong in a way I can't fully explain. I moved closer. I listened at the door. Nothing. No movement. No breathing. No shifting of furniture. No sign of life. So I opened it. No one was inside, but the shed itself was strange enough to make me wish someone had been. I expected tools, rust, dust, broken junk, boxes. But instead, the inside looked almost prepared. There was an old couch, a couple of desks, a dresser or two, and otherwise a lot of empty space. Too much empty space. It looked less like storage and more like a room someone had once tried to make livable. The single overhead bulb hung above everything, humming faintly. I turned it off, backed out, and shut the door. As I walked back to the house, a little voice in my head kept repeating the same thing. That's not normal. That is not normal. That is not normal. But once again, I buried it. Maybe the light had been left on for days. Maybe the shed had belonged to a previous tenant. Maybe there was a simple explanation. Inside, I sat on the couch, turned on the TV, and tried to shake the feeling off. The couch reclined almost flat, and after about half an hour, I fell asleep right there. I don't know how much later it was when I woke up, but I know exactly what woke me. A thump. My eyes snapped open. The TV was off. The room was dark. The house had that suffocating middle-of-the-night stillness where every sound feels louder than it should. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Someone was inside the house. Not outside, not on the porch. Inside. I froze so hard it felt like every muscle in my body locked at once. I listened as the footsteps moved slowly down the staircase. Heavy, deliberate. Not the uncertain steps of someone lost in a dark place, but the confident movement of someone who already knew the layout. They moved into the front hallway, then toward one of the back rooms. For a few seconds, I genuinely thought I might still be dreaming. It didn't feel real. But then adrenaline flooded me so violently that my hands started shaking, and I knew I was awake. I rose from the couch as quietly as I could and crept to the corner of the room. Then, holding my breath, I leaned just enough to peek around the wall. A figure stood in the darkness, a man. He had his back partly turned, and he was peering into one of the rooms as though checking it, searching it, looking for something, or someone. My whole body went cold. I pulled back out of sight. A few seconds later, I heard him move again. His footsteps returned down the hallway, toward the living room. I had nowhere to go. I backed into the darkest corner of the room and pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. The kind of darkness I was standing in felt almost solid. One of the only reasons I think I'm still alive. The man stepped into the opening of the room. He stood there staring at the couch, at the place where I should have been. Then, in a low, irritated whisper, I heard him say, "Where the hell?" Not, "Who's there?" Not, "Hello?" Not the reaction of someone surprised to find another person in the house. It was the muttered frustration of someone who had expected to find me exactly where he thought I'd be. He had already gone upstairs. He had already checked the bedroom. He had already searched other rooms. And now he was here, looking at the empty couch, confused because I wasn't where I was supposed to be. He was looking for me. That realization hit with such force it almost made me panic right there. If he had taken 2 or 3 steps farther into the room, he would have seen me. I was certain of it. But he didn't. He lingered there for another moment, staring. Then he turned and walked away. I heard him move through the hallway, then toward the back of the house. A door opened, then shut. For a second, I still couldn't move. Then everything in me broke loose at once. I grabbed my phone, my keys, I sprinted to my car and got out of there as fast as I could. Once I was on the road, I called 911. I also called the Airbnb host. The host didn't answer, but somehow, by the time the police arrived, the host showed up only minutes later. That detail has never left me. The police looked around with flashlights, took my report, and checked the property. Nothing came of it. The stay was refunded. I left. Officially, that was the end of the incident. But I have never believed the man in that house was some random intruder. I am convinced he either was the owner or someone with direct access to the property. And what haunts me most is this. When I woke up, I heard him coming down the stairs. That means he entered the house and went upstairs first, to the bedroom, to where he believed I would be asleep. If I hadn't fallen asleep on the couch that night, if I'd gone to bed normally, if I hadn't woken up before he found me, I honestly don't know what would have happened. And I don't like the answer my mind always gives me when I ask. The second place was another Airbnb, but this one was only for 3 days. It was a small property in a wooded area, not completely isolated, but not exactly close to anything either. The houses were spread apart with forest and land between them. It was my first time ever using Airbnb, so I didn't really know what was normal and what wasn't. I arrived around 5 in the evening, and immediately I was disappointed. The rental wasn't a private cabin or a separate little getaway like I'd imagined. It was practically right beside another house, maybe 10 feet apart at most. same driveway, same property. It was obvious the Airbnb was basically a second structure beside the host's main home. I didn't love that, but I figured I'd deal with it. I parked, started carrying my things inside, and that was when the host came out of the main house. He walked straight toward me. He introduced himself as Evan. He was in his 50s, tall and broad, with a thick gray beard and a presence that felt wrong from the moment he got close. It wasn't anything obvious. He didn't threaten me. He didn't say anything openly disturbing. But there was something off in the way he talked. Too familiar, too comfortable, too interested. He kept calling me buddy, which, for some reason, only made it worse. After a couple of minutes, he left me alone, and I remember feeling relieved, thinking that would probably be the only awkward interaction I'd have with him. That night, I relaxed for a while, then made dinner late. On the drive there, I'd picked up a ribeye steak from a store, thinking it'd be nice to cook something decent my first night. By the time I actually got around to making it, I was exhausted. I fried it quickly in a pan, ate it without anything on the side, took a shower, and went to bed. The next morning, I went into town for groceries and came back about an hour later. As soon as I pulled in, Evan came out of his house again. He waved, and for a moment, I thought that was all. But then I looked up and saw he was walking straight toward my car. I got out and started grabbing bags, hoping maybe he was just headed past me. He wasn't. He stopped right there beside me. "How was your first night? Everything good?" "Yeah," I said. "Everything was great." He smiled and nodded. Then he said, "How'd the steak turn out last night? Hopefully my kitchen had everything you needed." I just stared at him. For a second, my brain genuinely stopped. How did he know I'd made steak? He must have seen the expression on my face because almost immediately he added, "The steak. You mentioned yesterday that you picked one up for dinner." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I didn't remember saying that. "Not at all." I muttered something like, "Oh, right. Yeah, it was good." He smiled again, nodded, and went back to his house. That should have been the end of it. Instead, it sat in my mind like a splinter. Did I tell him? Maybe, possibly. I'd been distracted unloading my things the day before. Maybe I did mention it and forgot. But why had he remembered that specific detail? And why had he come out of his house just to bring it up? The entire rest of the day, I found myself checking the windows, half expecting to catch him standing outside. I never did, but the uneasiness stayed. That night, I ate, watched some TV, and eventually went to bed. Sometime during the night, I woke up. Not because of a loud noise, not because of a dream, because I felt wrong. That's the only way I can put it. I sat up in bed with that awful, heavy sensation that something was off. That strange, primal discomfort, like your body knows you're being observed even before your mind catches up. I got up and slowly walked through the house, room by room. Eventually, I made it to the front door. It was unlocked. I know how stupid this sounds now, but in the moment, I didn't react strongly enough. I opened the door, looked outside, and saw nothing except darkness and one light on in Evan's house, while the rest of it sat black and silent. Then I shut the door, locked it, went back to bed. It wasn't until I woke again at 5 in the morning that my mind started putting it all together. The way Evan had known about the steak, The feeling of being watched, the unlocked door, the growing sense that something had happened in that house while I slept. I got dressed and started checking the place again, this time with real attention. I was looking for anything unusual, and within minutes, I found it. In the kitchen, plugged into one of the outlets, was a black charging brick with a cable attached. I'd seen it the day before and assumed it was just a convenient charger for guests. But now, looking closer, I noticed a tiny dark circle on the front. A lens. I unplugged it immediately. Then I ran to the other rooms. There was another, and another. Nearly every room had one, even the bedroom. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped one. Hidden cameras. There were hidden cameras all over the rental. And right as the reality of that settled over me, there was a heavy knock at the front door. "Hello?" It was Evan. Another knock. "Hey, you mind opening the door for a minute? Just need to check a couple things." Then louder. "Hello? Yeah, I know you're in there. Can you open the door?" I went ice cold. His voice didn't sound casual. It sounded panicked, urgent. I grabbed my suitcase and started throwing things into it as fast as I could. Clothes, chargers, wallet, whatever I could get in seconds. Outside, his knocking grew harder. Then it stopped. Just stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the knocking. I froze and listened. And then I heard it. The faint, metallic click of a lock turning. The front door opened. He was coming in. I slammed the bedroom door shut, grabbed my suitcase, shoved the window up, and climbed out. As I hit the ground outside, I heard the bedroom door open behind me inside the house. I ran. I sprinted to my car, threw everything in, got behind the wheel, and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was at a hotel an hour away. Later, after calling friends and family, I reported everything to the police. They went to the property, but by the time they got there, every single camera I had found was gone. Gone. Evan denied everything, said none of it happened, said there were no cameras, said he never entered the rental. It became my word against his. Nothing happened to him. But I know what I saw. And what frightens me most is not just that he had cameras in that place. It's that the moment I discovered them, he knew, and he came to the door almost immediately. That means he was watching in real time, monitoring me, seeing exactly where I was, knowing the second I figured it out. I have no doubt that if I had opened that front door, or hesitated too long, or failed to get out of that window in time, that story would have ended very differently. Not with a police report, but with me disappearing into a house where someone already knew every room I had been standing in. A couple of years ago, I drove up to northern Minnesota to stay at a cabin rental. It wasn't booked through Airbnb or any big service. It was one of those privately owned cabins with an old, sketchy website that looked like it hadn't been updated in 10 years. But that wasn't unusual for remote cabin rentals. I'd stayed in plenty of places like that before. I chose this one because it was cheap, the surrounding woods looked beautiful in the pictures, and it seemed like the perfect place to disappear for a few days and decompress. But the moment I arrived, I felt wrong. I can't explain it any better than that. The cabin was more remote than I expected. The woods around it felt too dense, too silent, too watchful. I'd stayed in isolated places before, and usually there was something calming about it. solitude, fresh air, the stillness of nature. This was different. Looking out into those trees didn't feel peaceful. It felt like staring into a place where something had already noticed me. I tried to ignore the feeling. I had only a few hours left before dark, so I stayed inside, lit the fireplace, and eventually fell asleep. Sometime around 1 or 2 in the morning, I woke up. There was a soft sound outside, something moving across the wooden porch by the front door. By the time I was fully awake, it was already moving away. I got up quickly and looked outside, but there was nothing there. No animal, no person. Just dark woods and that same terrible sense that the silence wasn't empty at all. I stayed awake for a while. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been some animal passing through. Morning came, and everything seemed normal. I made coffee, ate something, let myself believe I was being irrational. Around noon, I decided to go for a walk. There were no proper trails that I could see behind the cabin, so I just started walking in a straight line into the woods. About 5 minutes in, I came across a narrow footpath winding through the trees. I followed it without thinking much about it. That was a mistake. The path ended at a tent, a large one. Not a camping tent someone had pitched for the weekend, but one of those heavy, semi-permanent setups that looked like it had been there for a while. Around it was a mess of gear, trash, old supplies, and random junk, enough to make it clear that someone was living there. Actually living there. The flap was open. No one was inside at that moment, but it did not look abandoned. Not even close. And it was close enough to the cabin that suddenly all of my discomfort from the night before made terrible sense. I didn't stay there long. I turned around and went straight back. Once I got to the cabin, I tried to contact the owner. That was when I realized I didn't even have a direct phone number, just an email on the website. And my phone only had 1 weak bar of service. The rest of the day passed quietly. Too quietly. That's one of the things I've learned since these experiences. When something feels wrong and then nothing happens for hours, it doesn't always mean you were mistaken. Sometimes it just means whatever is out there is waiting. As the sun began to set, I thought maybe a beer would help me relax. I sat in the living room and tried to force myself into normalcy. Then, about 20 minutes after dark, I heard something at the front door. A scratching sound, loud, repetitive, sharp against the wood. I stood up and stared at the door. The scratching came again, longer this time, slower, like metal dragging against the surface. I approached the door as quietly as I could, my pulse roaring in my ears, and when I got close enough, I heard something else. Heavy breathing. Right on the other side. "Hello!" I shouted. "Who's out there? What the hell are you doing?" The scratching stopped instantly. Then came the sound of someone scrambling away. I yanked the door open. A man was running into the woods. On the face of the door were deep marks and scrapes, like someone had been using a tool to pry it open. Any trace of denial disappeared. I was done. I grabbed everything important, stuffed it into my backpack, and ran for my car. Outside, the air was eerily still. The woods seemed to be holding their breath. I got in, started the engine, and pulled away. For a moment, I thought I had made it. Then, as I reached the denser part of the wooded trail leading out, a man suddenly ran into my headlights. I slammed in the brakes. The car skidded to a stop. He stood there, in front of me, illuminated in that dead white glare. His eyes looked almost reflective, wide open, bloodshot. His face was filthy, his hair was wild, his clothes hung off him like he'd been living rough for months. And in his hand, he was holding a crowbar. For one frozen second, we just stared at each other. Then he moved. He ran toward the driver's side door. The second he cleared the front of the car, I hit the gas as hard as I could. I heard a heavy thump as I shot past him. Later, I found damage on the side of the vehicle where he'd hit it. I drove straight out of there, straight home. And over the next several days, I tried to get in contact with the cabin owners. I had no luck, no real answers, no explanation for who was living in the woods near the rental, no explanation for why someone had tried to force the door, no explanation for why a man with a crowbar was waiting on the only road out. But I know this much. If I had stayed in that cabin that night, I don't think I would have left the next morning. What terrifies me? Most people love ghost stories because ghosts are easier to understand. They belong in stories, in legends, in old houses and dark corners. But the scariest things I've ever experienced involved real places and real people. A man entering a rental house in the middle of the night, whispering in frustration because the guest wasn't where he expected. A host secretly recording someone inside a property and then unlocking the door the moment he realized he'd been discovered. A stranger in the woods trying to pry open a cabin door before later stepping into the road with a crowbar in his hand. No monsters, no demons, just the unbearable realization that there are people in this world who wait until you are somewhere temporary, somewhere unfamiliar, somewhere isolated, and then they make their move. That's the horror that stays with you. Because after enough time passes, you stop wondering whether those places were dangerous. You start wondering how many other people stayed there and never realized how close they came. And maybe the worst part of all is this. Every single time, the warning signs were there. The stairs, the strange details, the unlocked door, the hidden devices, the porch sounds, the scratches, the footsteps. Fear rarely arrives screaming. Usually, it knocks softly first. And if you're unlucky, it lets itself in. The whistling on the Arizona Trail. In 2015, I went on a solo hike in Arizona, something I used to do whenever life became too loud to bear. Long hikes were my escape. 8 or 10 hours alone in the wilderness could quiet my mind better than anything else. That day, I found a trail so hidden, I nearly walked right past it. There was no sign, no parking area, no clear entrance, just a faint path buried behind thick brush, as if the desert itself had been trying to swallow it back. I didn't go looking for isolated places, but I never avoided them either. I preferred silence to crowds. So when I found that forgotten trail, it felt like luck. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The path wound upward through dry brush toward a modest mountain. But the farther I climbed, the stranger the land became. Trees stood gray and dead, their bark peeling away in strips. Others had collapsed across the trail, or leaned at broken angles like they'd been twisted by something violent. It was obvious no one had come this way in a very long time. Then I heard it. A whistle. It drifted down from somewhere higher on the mountain, clear, deliberate, almost melodic. Not a bird, not the wind. A real whistle. Just a few careful notes before silence swallowed it again. I stopped cold. A shiver ran through me, but I forced myself to stay rational. Someone else had to be on the trail. That was the only explanation that made sense. So, I kept walking. About 20 minutes later, I heard it again. Same melody. This time, it was closer. Much closer. The sound settled into my chest like ice. I didn't like it, but I also refused to turn back because of some stranger whistling in the woods. I pulled out the pocket knife I always carried and kept climbing. A little farther up, a massive fallen tree blocked the trail, its branches tangled with thorns. I couldn't climb over it, so I stepped off the path to circle around. And that's when I saw the valley below. It looked like an old creek bed, dry and sunken, and in the middle of it stood a den. Not an animal nest, not storm debris. This thing had been built. Large sticks and heavy branches woven together with intention. It was too structured, too purposeful, too human. That was when the whole hike changed. The hidden trail, the dead forest, the whistling, the shelter. A horrible thought slid into my mind. What if someone was living out here? Every instinct in me screamed to leave. So I turned, and the moment I did, the whistle came again. Right behind me. I froze so hard, it felt like my heart had stopped. For one awful second, I couldn't breathe. Then I spun toward the valley, expecting to see someone standing beside that twisted shelter. Instead, I saw a goat. It stood just beyond the den, perfectly still, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. It was larger than any goat I'd ever seen in that region. Its body looked wrong, too big, too rigid, and its eyes were locked onto me with a kind of awareness that made my blood go cold. Nothing about it made sense. Why was it here, alone, in this place? Why did it feel less like an animal looking at me, and more like something studying me? I began backing away slowly, unable to look anywhere else. Then it opened its mouth, not like a normal animal, not naturally. Its jaw parted in a slow, unnatural way, as if even the motion itself was wrong. And then it whistled. The exact same melody I had been hearing the entire time. Something inside me broke. I ran. I don't remember choosing to run. My body simply took over. I tore down that mountain in blind panic, crashing through brush, stumbling over rocks and roots, hitting the ground hard more than once. But fear kept dragging me back up. I never looked behind me. Only once, far below the trail, I heard the whistle again. Soft now, distant, echoing through the mountain like a final warning. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead. For years, I told no one. I knew how it sounded, insane, impossible, humiliating. But after hearing stories about skinwalkers, about things that wear animal shapes and mimic sounds they shouldn't know, I found myself thinking back to that day. And no matter how many times I replayed in my head, I still can't explain what I saw. When I was a kid, my family went camping in Wisconsin every summer with close family friends. Every year, without fail, my dad and his best friend Billy took all of us kids on what they called a snipe hunt. If you know the joke, you already know the truth. Snipes aren't real. But we were children, and to us, they were absolutely real. My dad described them as vicious, bird-like creatures that hid in the trees and only came out at night. Every summer, my sister and I believed him all over again. Every summer, we were sure this would be the year we finally saw one. One evening, on the second night of the trip, Dad told us Billy had heard a snipe near the RV the night before. If anyone was brave enough, he said, we could go into the woods after dark and try to catch it. We all said yes. By the time the sun went down, every kid at the campsite was vibrating with excitement and fear. Some carried sticks. One kid brought a wooden toy sword. We thought we were going hunting. Dad led us into the woods, saying Billy had already gone ahead to scout. 10 minutes in, we heard rustling overhead. Then Billy came crashing out of the darkness, covered in red, screaming that the snipe had attacked him. Instant chaos. Kids shrieked and scattered in every direction. I was only 8. I had no idea it was a prank. I ran as fast as I could, blind with terror, until I found a tree with a thick bush at its base. I dove into it and curled up, trying not to cry, trying not to make a sound. After a while, the forest went quiet. Slowly, I peeked through the branches. That was when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a dog. Then I looked closer. Its legs were too long, thin, and stretched in a way that didn't seem possible. Its body was patchy, covered in uneven tufts of fur over pale skin. And its head looked wrong. Not deformed in an ordinary way, twisted, almost melted, as if something had tried to make a dog from memory and gotten it horribly wrong. Then I heard the sound it was making, a low, weak moan. Not aggressive, not loud, just soft and miserable. And somehow that made it worse. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. Something about it held me there. The longer I stared, the heavier the air became, until dread settled over me so completely I could barely move. Even now, all these years later, that's the only word I have for what I felt. Dread. It was the sick certainty that I was looking at something I was never supposed to see. Then I heard my father calling my name in the distance. The creature stopped. Slowly, it turned its head and looked directly at me. I still remember that moment with perfect clarity. Its gaze didn't feel animal. It felt aware, calm, curious, old. A second later, branches snapped nearby and my father burst through the trees. He grabbed me, lifted me up, and started apologizing, scolding, and explaining all at once. That it had only been a joke, that Billy's blood was fake, that no snipes existed. But I barely heard him. I twisted around to look back into the woods. The creature was gone. Not running, not retreating, just gone, as if it had never been there at all. On the way back, I asked my dad if maybe that was what a snipe looked like. He laughed nervously and told me no, snipes weren't real. That was the night I learned 2 things. Snipes don't exist, but something else does. For years, I tried to tell myself it had just been a coyote, sick, mangy, deformed, anything explainable. But deep down, I never believed that. Whatever I saw in those woods was wrong in a way ordinary animals aren't. Even now, when I'm biking or hiking alone, I still find myself glancing into the trees, and sometimes, just for a second, I think I see it again. Watching. For nearly 10 years, I lived with my wife and our 2 children in a remote cabin in Canada. It was the kind of life people romanticize. Quiet mornings, endless trees, clean air, and a world far removed from noise and traffic. No proper roads led to us, only narrow footpaths connecting our cabin to a few others hidden miles away in the forest. Over the years, those paths became our lifeline. We traded food, shared meals, and looked after one another the way remote neighbors do. We had a garden, livestock, peace, until the night that ended. Late one evening, I was alone in the living room reading when I heard the cattle outside begin to stir. Not ordinary movement, panic. The kind of restless, frantic shifting that makes you put a book down immediately. I went to the window and eased the curtain aside. The cattle were packed tightly together at the far end of the field, huddled as far from the tree line as they could get. At first, I couldn't see what had spooked them. Then I saw it. A deer, large, motionless, half hidden beside a tree near the edge of the forest. It was facing the house. At first, I told myself it was odd, nothing more. Deer wandered through the area often enough, but something about the way it stood there unsettled me. It wasn't feeding, it wasn't wandering. It was simply watching. Eventually, I let the curtain fall and went back to my chair. A few weeks later, my wife woke me in the middle of the night. The fear on her face was enough to get me moving before she even spoke. Then I heard it. A slow, scraping sound dragging its way around the outside of the cabin, as if someone were pulling a stick along the walls. The noise moved steadily, circling the house inch by inch. One full loop, then silence. I got up, checked on the children, grabbed my hunting rifle, and moved from window to window. Nothing. Then I reached the bedroom window. There, just beyond the trees, stood the same deer, perfectly still, facing me. Something dark and instinctive settled over me. I've never been a superstitious man. I don't go looking for ghosts or legends or curses. But in that moment, I knew, with a certainty I could not explain, that something was deeply wrong. The next morning, I set out to visit one of our neighbors. Before I left, I told my wife to keep the doors locked and the children inside. The walk to his cabin took miles. I moved fast, trying to reason through everything as I went. Maybe a predator had disturbed the cattle. Maybe someone had been outside the house. Maybe exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Then, halfway down the path, I heard leaves shift behind me. I turned. The deer was standing on the trail, 15, maybe 20 feet away. This time, I saw its eyes clearly. That is the part I will never forget. There was white around the irises. The pupils were small, too small. Its eyes looked disturbingly human. Every drop of warmth left my body. I ran to my neighbor's cabin like a terrified child, half sobbing by the time I reached his door. When I told him what I had seen, I expected confusion. Maybe concern, maybe an ordinary explanation. Instead, he looked at me like I had finally noticed something he already understood. Inside his cabin, he told me about old beliefs, about skinwalkers, about things that wear the shapes of animals, about presences that reveal themselves only when they choose to. What frightened me most was not what he said. It was how calmly he said it. I went home, and nothing followed me back that day. Over the next few weeks, the strange activity stopped. But it didn't matter. The damage was done. Sleep became difficult. Every sound outside sent my hand toward the rifle. Every movement beyond the trees felt deliberate. The forest no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. Eventually, we moved closer to town. I told my family it was for the children, for convenience, for a better future. That wasn't the truth. The truth was much simpler. Something had looked at me from inside the body of a deer, and after that, the woods no longer felt like home. It's been nearly 15 years. I never told my wife or children what I saw on that path, and I never told them what my neighbor believed it was. Even now, some quiet instinct inside me says I shouldn't, as if speaking too openly about certain things is enough to invite them back.